Morningside Farm hadn't been alive in a long time. Sure, the chickens still clucked in the morning, and the windmill still creaked its old lullaby when the wind blew in from the north. But the house no longer sang. The laughter was gone, like breath drawn in and never exhaled. And for Jonas Eldridge, that silence was louder than any storm. At 72, Jonas was held together more by habit than purpose. He woke up because his body still remembered how. He fed the animals because they depended on him, and he did his repairs with the kind of resigned efficiency of a man who no longer expected thanks from the world, the farm, or himself. The last time he had laughed, truly laughed, was over a decade ago. His son Theo had burned in the barn fire while trying to save a panicked dog, and with Theo went Jonas's joy, his reason, and, it seemed, the pulse of Morningside itself. The neighbors had stopped asking him to church. The county had stopped checking in. Even the mailman just left envelopes in the box without waving. It was a place forgotten by the world, and Jonas had made peace with that, until the woman arrived. He saw her first as a silhouette on the hilltop at dawn, hat brim wide, coat dusted from the road, and boots that had clearly walked farther than they were built for. She stood at the gate like she belonged to the land already, not a visitor, not a vagrant, just someone who had come home to a place that didn't know it was missing her. Jonas squinted into the morning light, heart tight with suspicion. No one ever came up the drive without calling first, and no one, absolutely no one, came just to help. "You lost?" he called out from the porch, voice still rusty from sleep. The woman looked up and met his eyes with the calm of a pond, unbothered by wind. "No," she said, "just arrived." She didn't carry a suitcase, just a canvas satchel faded by sun and stitched at the seams with care. Her boots were practical, her coat layered and well used, and a single braid of silver-threaded brown hair fell over her shoulder like a soft rope. Jonas stood on the top step, his hand resting on the worn railing, thumb brushing over a splinter that had been there longer than most memories. "You're standing on private land," he said after a pause. The woman nodded once. "I figured. You don't look like a bill collector." She cracked the faintest smile. "Wouldn't make much sense to walk all this way, just to collect on someone with dirt under his nails and ghosts in his barn." Jonas blinked, unsure whether to be offended or impressed. "You some kind of preacher?" "No." "Therapist?" "No." "Then what are you?" She looked toward the horizon, where the sky split amber over the edge of the barley field. "Someone who knows what it's like when the earth forgets how to breathe," she said, "and how to remind it." Jonas snorted. "The earth ain't got a problem breathing. It's people that choke on it." "You're not wrong," she said, "but sometimes the land holds on to grief like a scar." Jonas found himself studying her more closely now. There was a weight in her stillness that wasn't heaviness. It was readiness, like someone who had stood at more than one grave and come away stronger. "Well," he muttered, "I ain't got much to offer." "Don't need much," she said, adjusting her satchel. "Just space to work, and maybe a roof that doesn't leak too hard." He gestured to the potting shed near the west fence. "It leaks, but not hard." "Good bones?" she asked, and he shrugged. "Might be some left." She walked past him without waiting for permission. He watched her go, and something old and unused stirred in his chest. Curiosity, Hope's shy cousin. The potting shed leaned like an old man with a bad knee, but Clara didn't flinch when she opened the crooked door. Dust billowed out, accompanied by the smell of mildew, rust, and something faintly herbal, like thyme that had died too long ago to remember its name. She stepped inside, took one look at the cobwebbed corners, then immediately set down her bag and opened the windows. Jonas watched from the porch. Most people would have turned around. Some would have asked for tools. She asked for none of it. That first day, she didn't say much. She swept the entire floor, repaired a cracked window using wire mesh and wax paper, and pulled the moldy cot out into the sun. She found bricks behind the barn and laid them out in front of the shed like a makeshift path. She hung a string of bells on the door and a bundle of lavender in the rafters. Jonas came out near sunset, holding a chipped mug of black coffee. "Figured you earned something hot," he said. She took it with both hands. "Thanks." They sat together on the top step, not speaking. The sky blushed lavender. Crickets began their song. Jonas cleared his throat. Most folks would have walked away. Clara sipped the coffee, eyes fixed on the horizon. Most folks don't know what they're missing when they walk away. Not much to miss here. You'd be surprised. He watched her a while longer, and when she handed back the mug, he noticed her fingers were stained with earth and scarred at the knuckles. Not delicate hands, hands that knew work, and maybe pain. He didn't ask what brought her here, and she didn't offer. Some silences were kinder left whole. Over the next week, Clara made herself useful without once asking how. She mended the coop fence using broken pallets, repurposed a rusted wheelbarrow into a raised herb bed, and somehow managed to fix the back porch step Jonas had meant to replace for 3 years. She worked without intrusion, never asked about the photographs in the hallway, never touched the dusty banjo hanging above the fireplace, never commented on the barn with its blackened beams or the melted horseshoe nailed to its scorched frame. Jonas found that refreshing. The world had grown full of people who asked too many questions, or worse, gave too many answers. She asked none. She listened to the soil instead. She planted bush beans in a raised bed, humming a tune so low and strange that it seemed to rise from the roots themselves. She pulled invasive mint from under the stairs and replaced it with sage. She never used gloves, and her nails were always dirty. Jonas caught himself watching her sometimes, not with suspicion anymore, but with something closer to reverence. One evening, he walked out to the porch to find a loaf of fresh bread cooling on the railing. Clara was seated on the bottom step sipping tea, her boots off and feet crossed at the ankles. "You didn't have to do that," Jonas said. "I know," she replied. "Neither did you. For the coffee, for the shed." They shared the bread in silence, passing a jar of blackberry jam between them. As the sun dipped low, the wind stirred the leaves, and the barn creaked in its old voice. Clara finally spoke. "You ever think grief makes a home in the bones of a place?" Jonas stared into the horizon. "Every day." And that was all that needed to be said. Ruby arrived the way shadows stretch across fields, gradually, quietly, until you realize the whole shape has changed. Jonas first saw her from the window of the kitchen while scrubbing out the old kettle. A flicker of movement at the tree line. Just a blur of denim and a backpack that hung too heavy on a girl too small. She didn't knock. She didn't speak. She just sat beneath the cottonwood tree and stared at her shoes. Jonas stepped onto the porch, a familiar tension crawling into his chest. Clara joined him without being called. "Runaway?" Jonas asked. "Maybe," Clara said. "Trouble?" "Probably." Jonas made a sound in his throat. "We're not a halfway house." "No," Clara said. "We're just a place that hasn't forgotten how to grow." He shot her a look. "You talk like that on purpose?" She shrugged. They approached slowly. Clara moved ahead, her steps deliberate, boots crunching soft against gravel. When she reached the girl, she crouched but didn't speak. After a long moment, the girl looked up and pulled a folded piece of notebook paper from her hoodie. Clara read it, then handed it silently to Jonas. The note said, "I heard this place helps broken things. I don't have anywhere else." They didn't ask her name, not at first. They just brought her inside, gave her soup, and let her sleep in the hayloft above the goats. Ruby didn't say a word that night, but Jonas left the barn light on anyway. Ruby didn't speak, not the first day, not the first week, but she stayed. Every morning, Jonas would find her out in the field, following Clara like a shadow. She weeded without direction, hauled compost without being told. She mimicked everything Clara did, from the way she squatted near rows of squash to how she whispered to the marigolds when she thought no one was listening. Jonas kept his distance. "She's got too many walls," he told Clara one night over tea. "Too many things she's running from." Clara stirred honey into her mug. "Maybe, but she hasn't run away from here." He couldn't argue that. The days grew longer. The soil grew richer. Clara showed Ruby how to take softwood cuttings and turn them into herbs. Jonas caught the girl sketching in a tattered notebook, tiny drawings of beans, beetles, and flowers. She drew Theo's row, too, even though no one had told her what it was. One day after a particularly hot morning planting kale, Ruby approached Jonas on the porch, holding something behind her back. She handed him a folded piece of paper. On it, a charcoal sketch of the barn, complete with its scorched beam, but blooming with ivy, the top loft lit up with sunlight. "You draw this?" he asked. She nodded. "It's beautiful." She didn't smile, but she stayed. It started with a wind that had teeth. Jonas felt it in his knees before he saw it in the trees. Branches whipping like flags, clouds boiling in on themselves. The sky turned the color of bruised steel, and the animals cried out before the first crack of thunder split the silence. Clara was in the greenhouse, Ruby in the orchard tying young saplings to stakes. Jonas grabbed his coat and shouted her name. Clara emerged just as the first wave of rain hit sideways, pelting the windows like pebbles. She didn't hesitate, just pointed toward the field. "Get Ruby!" Jonas ran. The girl was still out there, hair soaked to her scalp, her arms wrapped around a stake as if her grip could hold the whole tree in place. "Ruby!" he barked. "Let it go!" "I can't!" she shouted. "It'll break!" "Better a tree than you!" She hesitated just long enough for him to reach her. He grabbed her wrist and tugged. They slipped once, then again, before landing hard in the mud. But they were moving, towards safety, together. By the time they reached the barn, soaked to the bone, Jonas was wheezing and Ruby was shivering, but alive. Clara had already herded the animals inside. She threw blankets over them both without saying a word. That night they slept in the barn on hay bales, the three of them in a crooked circle under oil lantern light. The wind screamed, but inside the quiet was warm. The storm passed like a fever, leaving behind broken limbs, sagging trellises, and rows of waterlogged lettuce. But nothing was gone. The greenhouse, though battered, still stood. The barn was intact. The pear trees bent but hadn't snapped. And Ruby stayed. She didn't ask to leave, didn't wander off or retreat into silence. The morning after, she was the first one outside, dragging lumber toward the coop with determination that made Jonas stop in his tracks. He picked up a hammer and followed. They worked without needing words, just the rhythm of nails and sawdust, Clara handing tools between them like a conductor of labor. Later, they found Ruby's notebook left open on the porch. Jonas flipped through it with careful hands. One page showed the greenhouse not in ruin, but thriving. Another, the barn lit by a firefly sky. And one sketch, just one, of the three of them, backs turned, seated beneath the stars. He closed the book gently. "She drew a future," he said aloud. Clara looked over. She believed in it first. Jonas nodded. And for the first time in years, he believed too. Autumn came early. The mornings turned crisp, and the hills around Morningside wore their patchwork of amber and gold like a shawl. Ruby collected fallen leaves in a jar beside her bed. Jonas started every day on the porch with tea instead of coffee. Clara began to walk farther in the mornings, into the woods, along the edge of the creek. She came back with fewer herbs, but her eyes looked fuller, like someone who had made peace with something the rest of them hadn't named yet. Then one morning she was gone. Not the way people vanish, but the way fog lifts. No note left on the table, no boots by the door, just her satchel missing and a bundle of mint hanging from the shed door. It was Ruby who found the letter, tucked between the pages of Jonas's seed almanac. "You don't need me anymore," it read. "You never did. You just needed each other. Thank you for letting me remember what it feels like to stay long enough to be part of the harvest." Clara, Jonas read it twice, then folded it and placed it beside the hearth, beneath the photograph of Miriam and Theo. That night the farm was quiet, but the silence didn't ache. It glowed. The morning after they found the letter, Ruby brought out a shovel. She didn't say anything, just walked to the far end of Theo's row and started digging. Jonas joined her after a moment, carrying a sapling pear tree Clara had left in the greenhouse weeks earlier. They planted it together in silence. Ruby placed a stone at its base with a name carved by hand. Clara's row. By the time the sun reached its peak, neighbors had started arriving, not with questions, but with casseroles, seeds, stories. A woman named Miss Evelyn from the valley brought a quilt. "For whoever needs to rest," she said. A boy who had once thrown rocks at the coop now knelt to weed the basil. Ruby began teaching on Saturdays about soil, about sketching, about stillness. Jonas gave tours, short ones. His knees weren't what they used to be. And every spring, the pear tree bloomed too early, like it couldn't wait to offer something back. Morningside was no longer quiet. It was full. Years passed. Jonas, slower now, with clouded eyes and trembling fingers, still woke at dawn. He didn't work the fields anymore, but he'd sit in the rocker with a blanket over his knees, watching the farm come alive with a rhythm that felt almost sacred. Ruby had grown into something strong, her hair darker, her shoulders broader, her voice confident when she taught the children who came on field trips. She had built a seed library in the old shed. People came from other counties just to trade beans for stories. Clara's row bloomed with more than fruit. It bloomed with questions and kindness and memory. One day, Ruby found Jonas asleep in the rocker, peaceful, still. In his lap, a letter addressed to the next tiller. If you're reading this, it means the land still breathes. Take care of it, and take care of yourself too. You don't have to carry it all alone. That's the first thing Clara taught me. Jonas. Ruby planted sunflowers that week along the fence line. Children painted wooden signs in bright colors, and when she played the banjo on warm evenings, she could almost hear the old laughter beneath her own. Somewhere far away, another woman, boots dusty, eyes steady, stood at the gate of another farm. She adjusted the strap of her satchel and smiled at a boy holding a rusted hoe. Want to learn how to remind the earth what it's capable of? She asked. He nodded, and they began again. Because some seeds never stop sprouting. They only wait for the right hands to lift them into the light. In the years that followed, Morningside Farm became more than land. It became a living memory, one that reached farther than the property lines and deeper than the topsoil. Letters came from other towns. A librarian from 3 counties over asked if her students could start a companion garden. A woman from the city wrote a poem inspired by a photograph of Clara's row and published it in the state's Farmer's Almanac. People began sending seeds in the mail. Jonas had saved all the envelopes, stacked in a box tied with string, each marked with a return address and a brief note. For the place that remembered how. Ruby cataloged them into a book, the Kindness Index. Every seed sent was planted, if not in soil, then in the hearts of volunteers. Veterans, teens with records, former nurses who wanted to work with their hands again. All found something to do at Morningside, something to tend. One year on what would have been Clara's 15th spring at the farm, Ruby hosted a gathering. No microphones, no politics, just a circle of chairs and a long table covered in bread, jam, and fresh thyme butter. They called it the Day of Digging. Each guest brought a handful of soil from their home. They mixed it together in a wide basin and used it to plant a single almond tree. At the base of the tree, they buried Jonas's seed box, wrapped in wax cloth. Some cried, no one felt alone. And when the wind moved through the pear trees at dusk, it rang the bells Clara had hung so long ago from the porch. Soft, steady, like a lullaby you only remember once you hear it again. Ruby stood beneath Clara's tree at twilight, her fingers brushing the smooth bark that had once been too thin to climb. Now it held branches strong enough for children to swing from and blossoms wide enough to shade the bench beneath it. She wore the same coat Clara had left behind, stitched with new patches from each growing season, a sunflower from year 3, a green bean leaf from year 7, a slice of orange corduroy from a stranger who had walked 30 miles just to kneel in Clara's row and leave a letter in the soil. Jonas had been gone for 5 years, but sometimes when the porch creaked just right, she could still feel him there, nodding quietly with approval, that half smile tugging at his face like a secret he never told. The new tillers, 3 of them now, lived on the property year-round. They'd added a greenhouse and rebuilt the chicken coop again, but they left the shed untouched, because some places don't need to be modernized. They need to be remembered. Ruby walked the rows one last time that evening, her boots sinking slightly into the soil softened by a day's worth of digging. She touched every marker, Theo's row, Clara's row, Jonas's bench, and at the gate, before turning in, she whispered, "Still growing." The wind stirred. The bell rang once, and the silence that followed was full. 1,000 miles away, in a town with no name on most maps, a girl leaned against a fence post staring at a field long left fallow. Her jacket was too thin for the wind. Her breath came out in bursts of doubt. She clutched a letter she hadn't yet dared to open. The land was tired, the gate hung loose. But the soil, if someone had listened close enough, still breathed. The girl didn't see the woman approach at first, just a soft scuff of boots, then the creak of leather as someone sat beside her on the old bench. She looked up. A stranger with gentle eyes and windburned cheeks smiled and held out a seed. "Peach," the woman said, "likes broken soil." The girl blinked. "Why give it to me?" "Because something told me you'd know what to do with it." The girl didn't answer, but she took the seed. And from somewhere far behind them, a breeze carried the faint scent of rosemary, pears, and soil warmed by the hands of those who had once believed in places that had been forgotten. The girl stood, turned to the gate, and opened it, because stories never end. They just grow somewhere new.